I want to begin with asking all of you a question. How many of you have been to a museum? Any museum by a show of hands? Okay. Now, how many of you have been to a museum on a school trip alongside your companions from school? Great. Now, I have been to many museums on many school trips, and from my general observation of life, there are three types of students when you go to a museum on a school trip. The first ones are the ones who will find a sculpture or a painting that looks rather funny to them, and they'll bring their friend to that sculpture and then painting and say, "Ye dekho, ye tumhari tarah lagta hai." It's the Instagram version when you send somebody a reel or a meme and say you or me. The second type are the ones who will be constantly looking at their watches and seeing ab kaun sa period khatam ho gaya hoga school mein. Fourth period maths khatam ho gaya. 2 more periods you stay and you go back, 7th period ho jayega, 8th mein to ghar chutti. And then the third type of student at the museum are the ones who are actually interested in looking at the sculptures and the paintings and the exhibits. But what happens with them is also very interesting. They're put in this very long line, and usually there is an instructor or a guardian or usually the PT teacher of school who's like, "Chalo, chalo, move, 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 move." You are literally being made to gallop through history. And you know, today we talk about taking it one day at a time, but imagine at the museum we're not taking it even 1 century at a millisecond. And in all of this, who or what suffers? The past. You know, think about it. Think about how eons ago a patron or a king or a queen or a craftsperson learning a craft through generations and then spending time slowly to make something, be it a painting, be it a coin, be it an inscription, leaving it for us with a range of stories to be displayed at the museum. And yet, we don't see it as a story. And that is the problem with how we view history. We have forgotten somewhere along the line that the past is not a distant study of names, dates, and places. It's a story about us, the saga of humanity. And the museum is the best place where you find all of these stories stored in these tangible objects. Now, years later, I take people to the museum with me. And I tell them to invoke that inner child. You know that wonderment we used to feel as children when we used to hear the words, "once upon a time"? That childlike curiosity to see something that goes back to such a long period, and yet it has something for us. And there's a very basic concept in Indian aesthetic of ras. So what is ras? Ras is anything that has a flavor, a fragrance, or an essence. But the problem is that somewhere we forgot that anything that has flavor needs its rasikas, its connoisseurs. And so when I go to the museum, I tell people, you're not a passive participant in the process of looking at all of these objects. You are a part of shaping its perception. You are as much a part of history, and you don't even know it yet. And I think that really changes the way in which we look at history and perceive it. Now, you will say, "Eric, all of that is great, but history is not all about art and museums and paintings and sculptures. Just because you're obsessed with them does not mean everybody has to be." And that we still have to sit in many classrooms of history with people telling us whose mother was who, whose father was whom, which prince fell from grace, which princes rose to rule, which inscription is carved where, and oh my God, the dates and the dates and the dates, tariq pe tariq. I mean, there's a lot to take in. And yeah, it is. I can't do anything about it. I mean, I sat in many math classrooms with my math teacher telling me, "Learn this formula because you will use this every day in your life." I don't remember the last time I used that formula. So if I had to go through all those classes, you can maybe also sit through some history classrooms. But jokes aside, in the midst of all of this historical knowledge, yet again, what we forget is that it's a people story. And it's a people story that constantly rubs shoulders with the present. Even in ways that we don't realize, we interact with the past every day. Be it in the food that we eat, you know, flavors literally melting into each other through centuries. Be it the outfits that we wear, you know, like this gorgeous quilted cloak that you will find in a lot of Pahadi paintings. Be it the architectural makeup of our homes, or even the relationships that we share with our parents. Yes. A lot has not changed with how children and parents are. Let me give you an example. In 1528, the first Mughal king, Babur, received a letter from his son Humayun. Humayun was overseas. And Humayun had been blessed with a child. So he writes to his father that I have been blessed with Alaman, a child. Now, before I continue the story, I want to ask all of you, how many of you have had a problem with your parents telling you that your handwriting or your writing skills are not good? Or your teachers telling you, thoda teda hai, thoda chota hai, thoda bada hai, seedhe se likho. I think a lot of us have that experience. Things were not that different in history. So imagine, Humayun has written a letter to his father. Babur says, you are a grandfather now, congratulations. Babur receives this letter in India. He reads it and he writes back, congratulations. There's a lot of fun and joy in his letter and his response to him. But in all of this, Humayun also receives Babur's letter which says, son, what is wrong with your writing skills? Because I could not understand a word of what you wrote. तुम इतना बड़ा चढ़ा के लिखते हो कि कुछ समझ ही नहीं आया. And imagine, he is saying to him that stop elaborating, stop writing in such an ornate way. And all Humayun had told his father was that you're a grandfather now. So imagine a child receiving this letter in Badakhshan and thinking to himself that really, dad, I told you about you becoming a grandfather and you're telling me that my writing skills are not up to par. Things are also not that different when we throw a fit with our parents. Nowadays we may just, yell a little loudly, pace across the room and go and try to shut the door so that it makes a sound. Medieval children also did the same thing. It was a little more dramatic though and a little more exaggerated because they would openly revolt and establish their independent kingdoms. For example, Jahangir did that when Akbar was in power. But Jahangir forgot all about it when his own son Shah Jahan started rebelling against him. So what happens is that Shah Jahan is now openly rebelling against his father, Jahangir. And Jahangir decides that he wants to vent. So he literally goes back. He opens his diary, which is now known as the Jahangir Nama, and he starts writing, my son, he has gone into the valley of misfortune. Be-daulat. That is what I'm going to call him from now, unfortunate. He basically says, Shah Jahan to gaya guzra hai, iska kuch nahi ho sakta. And imagine, we know that history tells us years later that both of them did reconcile. Now my point in telling you all of these stories is that history is as much about these sorts of emotions and relationships, but we have forgotten that somewhere around the way. Parents and children, love and reconciliation, loss and anger. The sea of feelings that we feel today were as relevant and as embedded in history as it is today. Now, suppose after telling you these very interesting anecdotes, I have convinced you to give history a chance. And now you may ask me, so where do we begin from? And there could be the usual academic answer, you begin from the very beginning. But what does that even mean? Because if I say that there is a beginning to history, I may also mean that there is an end to history. And that brings you to a very interesting point in time. When does history end? Now, in school, when you would be studying history, history will end at a certain point of time, that is 1947, with the independence and partition of India. And after that, everything that is taught is in political science or sociology. But life is a bit more complicated than that. History does not end anywhere because you are a part of it. Everything I have said before this moment has left its intangible imprint, faded into time, and morphed itself into the fabric of history. And when you begin to think of history with that immediacy, you realize that the past and the present are constantly rubbing shoulders to produce our futures. And thus, if it intimidates you to start history somewhere, and the prehistoric and proto-historic and the Harappan civilization and the Egyptian civilizations and so on and so forth sound too daunting, then you do not really have to follow that structure. Learn to embrace the past as stories from where you can learn something. So I always say, pick an era, pick a person, pick an object or a story from history that you think you like, and that will lead you going down into a rabbit hole of the past. This is what I call a corridor to history. A corridor to history is anything that piques your curiosity. For me, it was art and museums, and that is why you will find me there so often. But for a lot of people, these corridors can be anything. Even the most unexpected questions, stories, and entities can bring you closer to history. Even ghosts. Yes, you heard me right. And who does not like a good old spooky story? So let me give you my example. I live in Delhi, and for the past 5 years, I've been doing heritage walks across the city. Now, Delhi is a city of cities. It has a very diverse, long, checkered, complicated past and many, many monuments. So it's inevitable that there will be some medieval monument or some ancient relic that will have a ghost. So in some monuments, you have a ghost of a begum who crushed diamonds and swallowed them. In some places, you have ancient pillars that haunt you. In some places, there are British ghosts from the East India Company who will wear their khaki uniform and come and ask you for a light for their cigarette. But they're headless. So you keep wondering, if they're headless, how will they smoke? Now, when I do my heritage trails, we bring in a lot of stories from primary sources, secondary sources, oral histories, visual histories. But there is always somebody in that walk who will ask me, so who's the ghost here? And I began to get interested in the question. I began to get so interested that I've started working on a book, but that's for another TED Talk. However, what I found most interesting in when somebody asked me, who's the ghost here, I started to wonder, why is our history so haunted? And that made me realize that these ghosts that linger on from the past speak to larger moments of history. They are ghosts of the partition of 1947. They are ghosts from the revolt of 1857. They are ghosts who had major roles to play in significant turning points in history. So the ghost is only a corridor to make you think about the past. And our vocabulary and our inner scapes, we are constantly thinking about history, and yet we don't realize it. But you begin to, when you slowly begin to see the natural curiosity that all of you have, even when it comes to a ghost story. But by giving you all of this gyan, it may appear as if I was just born with a love for history. And I have realized that I've always wanted to become an academic and of course wear this quilted outfit to come deliver this TED Talk. No. And now I have to admit something. I've returned to Chandigarh after 10 years. I studied for a good amount of time over here, and very crucial years of my life were in Chandigarh. I went to one of the gardens where I used to play as a young kid yesterday, a 14-year-old Eric. Now today, a 14-year-old Eric can joke about the fact that I could not understand the math formula when I was back in school. But for the 14-year-old Eric, 10 years ago, playing in that garden, that was the most terrifying thing. Because I was told, agar ye formula nahi aaya, then there is no future. It's almost ironic now that I have now found my future in the past. But tell me this. We host these events and we call storytellers and artists and historians and filmmakers and all sorts of people to tell their anecdotes and stories. But how many of us have grown up in educational institutions where we were told that these are things you could do, that these are things that you can sustain yourself with professionally? How many of you were given the possibility that you could go up to your guardian or your parent or your teacher and say, when I grow up, I want to become a historian? It was very difficult. And it only was in 12th grade, when I came out of my board's exam and I had just given my history examination, that 3 things happened. First, I realized that history is my story as much as it is anybody else's. It is our story, and we are all part of its canvas. Second, the subject gave me some sense of relief. That realization that humans have existed for ages beyond human comprehension, and yet we have all made it here. Through all the war, conflict, turmoil, disaster, and violence, we have survived. And that is what we need to remember. We see so many debates and discussions today that make you think that history is a battlefield. And we are made to think of it as grounds of division, separating people from one another, but open your eyes. If there is one thing that we should learn from history, is that we have coexisted and survived through times. And so, you need to foster empathy, inclusivity, and love. You need to look at people around you and say, hey, you're also experiencing this wide, wicked world for the first time with me. Let me be kinder to you. And 3, I finally realized that I wanted to share my love for history with the world. And that is when Itihasology was born. A platform dedicated to not only celebrating our multifaceted and checkered histories, but also a place that would bring out stories from the niches of the past that we don't hear of. You know, we think we want to become so many things, be it a stylista, be it a cook, be it anybody who has that creative urge in them to explore. There's a past to all of this. And I want to tell you that your story is in history. Since its inception in 2019, Itihasology has been the most fulfilling and surprising roller coaster I've ever embarked on. One of the biggest learnings has been that a lot of people do end up loving history, but very late in life. And they come back to me at monuments and come to me at museums and open a book and say, oh, तो ये history होती है. And be it through heritage trails, museum experiences, our posts and reels, and a lot of reels, I also have to dance to trending audios to make people realize that, you know, you are also welcome to this subject. I've got to go to places and tell people that there is indeed a future in the past, like I'm telling all of you today. So as I come to a close of this, I just have two things to say. First, my aim here is to not tell you to become a historian. That would be the same age-old pattern of somebody telling you what is the path for you to follow. What I am trying to say is that you are a part of history, and so you leave an impact. Do not think that whatever it is that you do is not significant. You leave your imprint on the past and history will remember you. So whatever it is that you do, put your heart, soul, passion, everything that you want to in it. And I kid you not, there will be some eccentric historian years later who will remember you. And second, now that I'm here, I may as well admit it. Honestly, sorry to all my math teachers, because if I paid a bit more attention to that formula, maybe my life would have been a bit easier. But it is history that got me here, so I'm not complaining. Thank you.